Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this live call with Dr. Rick Hanson. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Kaylee Isaacs, and I'm the founder of the Awake Network. It's my honor to introduce this call with Dr. Rick Hanson, who is an incredibly skilled and generous teacher. He's also a renowned psychologist, New York Times bestselling author, founder of Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, and senior fellow of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. Using his extensive background in psychology and practical neuroscience, Dr. Hanson has spent over 35 years developing the 12 pillars of well-being. Each pillar is a specific pivotal skill for cultivating overall well-being and resilience. And today we're going to be speaking about these 12 pillars, the general approach, and then also be diving into two specific pillars of mindfulness and self-caring. That'll be followed by asking some questions from the community who's watching this call live. So if you are watching live now, I encourage you to scroll down to the comment section below, which is where you'll be able to ask your questions and test it out by introducing yourself. Let us know who you are, where you're watching from, so we can see a little bit of the community who's joining us today. So there's going to be a lot of questions, and we're going to be looking for questions that are short and to the point so that we can cover as many as possible. And after the Q&A, we'll also have the opportunity to hear a little bit about Rick Hanson's online course that's going to be focusing on developing the 12 pillars of well-being in our everyday lives. So now it's my honor to welcome Dr. Rick Hanson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Kaylee, as always, it's a treat to be with you in this way, and greetings to everyone who's listening or watching this.
So to start off, could you tell us a little bit about the 12 pillars of well-being and why you created this approach?
Yeah, I thought your summary was really excellent. Each one of these pillars is a factor. It's a strength, to put it in plain English. I like words with just one syllable, like strength, right? It tends to have a kind of potency to it. But anyway, these are basically 12 strengths that are the psychological factors, the internal factors of resilient well-being in a changing world. To be clear, as context, we also need to do what we can to improve the environment around us in all kinds of ways, whether it's relationships with others or getting a healthcare system in our country that actually works for everyone. We also need to build up resources inside our bodies with nutrition and regulation of important systems. All this is important. I'm a psychologist, I'm a software guy, so I'm especially interested in how we can develop psychological resources, because I think that, as research shows, in general, on average, those are actually the most potent factors, internal mental resources, for overall resilient well-being over the long haul, on average for people. So how do we develop those? Well, that's also taken me as a software guy into a deep interest in our underlying neurobiology, especially within an evolutionary framework. So to kind of cut to the chase here, to have resilient well-being in a changing world, to be continually adaptable, not just surviving the worst day of our lives, but thriving every day of our lives in the face of challenges, we need to be able to meet our needs. It's interesting, there's a very fundamental notion in biology and psychology of need management that in some ways I think has fallen a little bit too much to the wayside, and we need to foreground it again, because we sustain well-being by meeting our needs and, of course, tending appropriately to the needs of others. So what are our fundamental needs? There's an organizing framework here that I use for the 12 pillars that draws on this notion that we have three basic overarching categories of needs for safety, satisfaction, and connection. Now, the way that a lizard meets its needs for satisfaction and connection might be very different from the way that a human being does, but at bottom, it's the same kind of need broadly. So what I've done in this, structure of the 12 strengths is to look at each one of those three needs, safety, satisfaction, and connection, managed by, as a summary term, avoiding harms, approaching rewards, and attaching to others for safety, satisfaction, and connection. And those systems, avoiding, approaching, and attaching, are loosely related to the three-stage evolution of the brain in its more or less reptilian brainstem, very focused on safety needs, mammalian subcortex, tons of new capabilities for meeting needs for satisfaction, such as being able to sustain pursuit and hunt at night due to being warm-blooded. And then we have the primate human neocortex sitting on top that's very good at attaching to others. I'm summarizing a lot of material here, but there's a deep grounding in science in this program. And by the way, just to speak ahead about the online program that we do about this, we have a lot of the scientific resources packed into that program, kind of in the background, if you have any interest in that. So to sum up and finish, I took these 3 needs, and I'm a model maker. I've got a 3x12 matrix for something or other almost all the time. In this case, only 3x4. 3 needs, and then 4 ways to manage well-being. If you think about it, recognizing what's true, resourcing yourself in general, regulating yourself, and relating to others. So we have recognizing, resourcing, regulating, and relating. And then if you apply those 4 ways to promote well-being to each one of these 3 needs, 4 times 3 equals 12, thus the 12 strengths model. And what I really love about this is this idea that, no matter what has happened in the past, and no matter how bad it is in the present, every day you can grow something good in yourself. You can learn a little bit about other people. You can learn a little bit about the world. You can learn about yourself. You can become a little more capable. You can let go of a little of the old crud. You can take 1 stone at least out of your backpack. You can, as I have experienced myself, empty your own personal bucket of tears, 1 spoonful at a time each day. You can do that. And that's fantastically hopeful. No one can stop you from learning and growing every day. I've gotten extremely interested in what's called positive neuroplasticity, how to actually turbocharge your own personal growth process so that you get the most out of the experiences you're having and you can hardwire them more efficiently into your own nervous system. So it's great to become more skillful, but the fundamental opportunity is to grow and learn every day. And no one can stop you from doing it. No one can defeat you from particularly what you're doing in the inner temple of your own mind. And to make it really old school, to relate it to fundamental ideas of self-reliance, no one can do it for you either, which gives it traction and teeth and truth because you earn the benefits of your own practice every day.
Thank you, Rick. And so we have a lot of medical professionals. We just finished a summit for medical professionals watching. We also have teachers and, just all of us have busy lives. And so when we're looking at how we can go about building these different strengths, what are some ways that we could actually do this through our everyday lives?
That's an excellent question. So this takes us into the fundamental neuropsychology of learning really broadly defined, not just memorizing the multiplication tables, but learning social, emotional, somatic, motivational, even spiritual learning. Learning to become stronger, kinder, more patient, more resilient, more loving, more confident, more capable with other people. That's a kind of learning as well. So how does learning happen in the brain? And it's a remarkable point that, for me at least, that a typical school teacher, and I think there's a special place in heaven for school teachers, a typical school teacher has a theory of learning. But most people who are involved in coaching, psychotherapy, mindfulness training, self-compassion training, and human resources training, and so forth, tend to have no underlying theory of learning because there isn't one that's been developed with regard to social emotional learning, which is a huge hole, right? We're in the growth game, we're in the learning business, and we don't have a theory of learning. Like, how does the learning actually happen neurologically, grounded in the body? So that's been a very deep dive for me, and I've developed a lot of material there that people can learn about freely from my website and other places. But the essence is really simple. It's summarized in the saying from the work of the Canadian psychologist Donald Hebb: neurons that fire together, wire together. So we have a 2-stage process. We first must experience whatever we want to grow in ourselves, including the growing that comes from releasing old pain. So healing itself is a form of learning. Development, even awakening, is a process of learning. So first we must experience what we want to grow. We must get an activated state of mental neural activation occurring. Great. That's easy, relatively speaking, to experience a moment of gratitude or mindfulness or grit, let's say. Very straightforward. What we routinely forget to do, though, is to focus on maximizing the impact of the second stage of learning in which we wire that momentary pattern of activation into the brain, in effect, as a lasting change of neural structure or function, without which there's no lasting value. Experiencing does not equal learning. States do not necessarily become traits. Yes, sometimes there is a kind of incidental process of learning. Throw enough mud on the wall, something will eventually stick to the mind, right? And there are certain people who are natural learners because they're doing what I really recommend, which is to emphasize our relationship with what we're experiencing at the time to maximize its neuroplastic impact. So, ways to do that that are very, very straightforward to us. And by the way, I'm going to close my door because there's some kids having a great time in a pool nearby. I grew up around pools in LA, so I know kind of what that's like. All right, great. So I've learned to close the door when the kids start splashing that door. Anyway, so for example, classic line, neurons fire together, wire together. So if you're having a useful experience, you're with your partner. I've had this experience more than once myself in my long marriage, where you suddenly realize, whoa, it goes better if I'm like this. So I want to help this sink in so it becomes more of a habit. In other words, I want to increase the conversion rate from state to trait, right? So you're having a useful experience. Or maybe you look out the window and you just see flowers, or you listen to children laughing and you have a sense of happiness and contentment in the moment as it is. Or you get something done. And there's a sense of satisfaction and completion about it. Or maybe differently, you feel cared for by another person. Your cat crawls into your lap and it's really a sweet moment. Oh, okay. Or deep down inside, you realize, no, I need to be much more serious about my exercise program or my sobriety or my commitment to practice of some kind. You know, you really feel the power of that intention and you want to really let it and help it sink in. How can you do that? I think there are multiple ways to do this. I've really developed a lot of detail about it. I have different models, that walk through the steps in a systematic way. But I'll tell you 3 things you can do multiple times a day. Privately, no one needs to know you're doing them. Just do one of them. They'll help. All 3 are really good. Here we go. First, stay with the experience for a breath or longer. It's shocking to really watch your mind jumping onto the next thing within a second or 2 instead of staying with the present moment of the current beneficial experience so it can actually have time to lead to some sort of lasting change in your brain. Stay with it for a breath or 2 or longer. Second, try to feel it in your body. Yes, there's a place for useful ideas. Somewhere in my 20s, I realized that growing up, I'd been a nerd, but not a wimp. That was a very useful idea for me. There's a place for right view, for cognitive methods, but where things have the most impact, including in terms of overall change inside us, is when they have a strong somatic and emotional quality. So try to feel it in your body. Wake down, don't just wake up. Third, focus on what's rewarding about it. Stay with what's enjoyable or meaningful in the experience. That will naturally tend to increase activity of 2 neurotransmitter systems in the brain, dopamine and norepinephrine. And as dopamine and norepinephrine activity rise, particularly in the hippocampus, a key part of the brain that's the front end of much of the learning and growing we're having, as activity of dopamine and norepinephrine rise in the hippocampus, that increases the degree to which the experience we're having at the time is flagged for protection and prioritization as it gets consolidated over the hours and days to come into long-term memory. That's kind of it. What I've just described is simple. It feels good to do it. It's private. It only takes a handful of seconds each time you do it. But each time you do it, bit by bit by bit, plausibly, you are increasing the registration of lived experience into your own body. So increasingly, you take those resources with you wherever you go.
So this approach that you're describing of really letting the benefit land, this can be applied to basically all of the 12 pillars that you've defined. Is that correct?
That's correct. In other words, and I'll just walk through them right now. If you're having experiences, let's say, of self-compassion or getting on your own side, being motivated to take really good care of yourself, and I hope we get to talk more about that pillar. When you're having those kind of experiences, you can really help them land. Or in the second pillar, mindfulness, when you have a sense of what it's like to be really in the present with full awareness of both the outer and the inner worlds, with a stability of ongoing recollectedness, moment by moment by moment, you can help that sink in. Or learning, that's the third pillar. That's the strength that grows the other strengths, really. When you watch your own mind and you are observing the process of how to gain emotionally and somatically and interpersonally from the experiences you're having, you get better at learning. In effect, you learn how to learn in emotional and healing and developmental kinds of ways. And that's an incredibly useful thing. So that's the third pillar. And then grit, feelings of vitality or grit, like determination, endurance, fortitude, you can help those sink in. Feeling strong, I think that's such an important experience, including the strength of simply enduring, a very underrated form of strength, just lasting. Or in the fifth pillar, gratitude, broadly defined gladness, thankfulness, appreciation, openness to wholesome pleasure, including beauty. And then confidence, that's the sixth of the pillars of the strengths, which I use as a marker word for self-worth, feeling of personal value, and healing old feelings of inadequacy and shame. Right? And then the seventh pillar is calm. Now we're in the territory of regulation, the third of four aspects of well-being, regulation. So regulating your own needs for safety, developing a sense of being able to strengthen the parasympathetic wing of the nervous system so it has more ongoing activity and you have readier access to it to kind of be calm. And then motivation, really important skill, to be able to self-motivate, to be able to help yourself want what's good for you that you don't naturally want that much, right? That's such a key to life, being able to motivate yourself, including to be able to aspire without attachment, to go for things without getting your knickers in a twist if you don't get what you've aimed for. And then intimacy, how to have a wonderful balance of connection and autonomy, because that sweet spot where you can be both me amidst we, and you can bring in the sense of we to strengthen the feeling of me, that also is a phenomenal psychological resource. Intimacy. And then the last three, courage, which has to do with interpersonal assertiveness. I've known a number of people that are physically brave or brave in business, but interpersonally, it's hard for them to sustain vulnerable, authentic self-expression and speak up for their own needs in ways that are really dignified and effective without tipping into losing it and going over the top. So courage. And then comes aspiration, which is a really fascinating territory for how do we be ambitious? How do we work hard and be ambitious while being fundamentally at peace with what happens and not getting caught up in effect, greed for our various career goals? And then the last strength is the strength of service or generosity, which is a really beautiful strength to think about. Getting good at giving, getting good at forgiving. In that section of my material, I talk about forgiving others and forgiving yourself as a very fundamental form of giving. And ultimately, learning how to widen the circle of us, which is deeply rooted in our ancient history as hunter-gatherers, both human and hominid ancestors, to widen the circle of us to include more and more and more and more of them in an interconnected world. So those are the 12, and each one of them is an opportunity when you're having those experiences to really, really, really help them sink in.
Thank you. So let's dive into the first pillar of self-caring. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about why it's such an essential pillar. And then also if there's any particular practices that you could recommend where we might be able to build that strength through our daily life.
Sure. And I'll be really succinct on this one. It's the first pillar because that's where it starts. If you're not on your own side, you won't be motivated to practice. and you won't be motivated to use what you practice. And I'm a long time psychotherapist as well as other roles. And one of the things that's really struck me is that for many people, they are easily and readily on the side of other people. They are for other people, but they're not mobilized to be for themselves. They're moved by the suffering of others. They're not very moved or motivated by their own pain. So this pillar is about cultivating the sense of tender self-compassion, drawing on a lot of the research about the power of self-compassion, including the ways that it makes people stronger and more resilient, as well as more ambitious. It doesn't make people self-indulgent and lazy. It has actually the opposite effect. So self-compassion, and also the feeling of being for yourself in a more muscular way, in which you kind of lean in to your life with a feeling of, life may have really rattled me, but I'm still here. I'm still on my own side. And I think practices of self compassion, as much research shows, are very useful. But don't forget that muscular quality that my needs matter too, healthy entitlement. It's not that I'm thinking less of others. Actually, as I fill up my own cup, and here too, as research shows, as my cup runneth over, then I'm going to be more inclined to be generous, pro-social, and patient and altruistic with other people. So that's that first thing. And I would really one of the ways into that, by the way, I should add, is that you can, in the moment, as you're having experiences just on your own that are in these categories of, let's say, being strong for yourself or having an attitude for a few seconds at least, if not a little longer, of kind of kindness, a sort of sweetness toward yourself when things are hard. When you're having those kind of experiences on the fly, you can slow down to take them in. You can also self-generate them. You can recall times you felt that way, maybe times when other people were for you and were supportive that you can tap into and draw on. Maybe you can recall times, as I have, because I've done a lot of things in wilderness, including stupid stuff that I managed to live through with rock climbing and other kinds of things, and times where you really drew on a willfulness. Like for me, we are going to get off this mountain and we are going to live. We aren't going to be comfortable. We're going to be soaking wet and freezing cold, but we are going to live to see the sunrise. That feeling. You could pull up these memories as well. And as far as your brain's concerned, once the state is occurring through any particular means that are appropriate, right? Once you're having an experience, it doesn't matter what the source of that experience is. Once that song is playing in the inner iPod, then you can turn on the recorder.
So one way you're describing is that we can actually bring up memories to get into that state and then let it sink in. And then from what you were describing before, it seems that if we're just having these experiences come up naturally during our everyday life, a feeling of self-compassion or compassion from others towards us, that we could just take a moment to let that sink in.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for a lot of people, this process of internalization uh, is aimed at lasting change in the brain, more broadly in the body altogether. So it's a very embodied kind of process. And so it's not just that I'm saying, hey, smell the flowers, see the roses. That's trivial. It's easy to smell the flowers. It's easy to see the roses. Yeah, good. Nothing wrong with that, right? But that's just where the process begins. It's not where it ends. If we want to help ourselves grow and gain, it's very important to take in. And for myself, being very informed by a perspective in Buddhist psychology that recognizes the vulnerability that we have to craving, broadly defined, a sense of something missing, something wrong. In that framework as well, it is really useful to internalize supplies of various kinds to fill ourselves up and reduce the forces inside us that drive us toward craving. Because when the heart is hungry, it's going to look for things outside. But as we feel increasingly filled up from inside, particularly through the internalization repeatedly of the felt sense of needs sufficiently met, safe enough in this moment, satisfied enough in this moment, loved and loving enough in this moment, as we repeatedly do that, then we build up a very robust, what I call unshakable core. inside, so that as the waves of life hit us, we're not shaken in our core. We might be rattled. You might get a little crispy around the edges, a little irritation, a little flaring, a little worry. But in the core of our being, there's a stableness, there's a stability of calm, contentment, and love in our innermost being. And to me, that's the fantastic opportunity.
So we have some questions rolling in. I'll just remind folks that we are taking questions in the comment section down below. And I'm going to go ahead and read one now that's related to self-care. How does one overcome self-critical thoughts when trying to practice good self-care?
Huge question. Absolutely fantastic. And in my experience, the fact that the questioner is aware of it is 50% right there. So, congratulations. Hey, good news. You're already aware of the issue. And, really from long experience, I can say that's half the journey right there. Now, the other half, right? There are a variety of methods. A lot of approaches tend to attack the critic first. And I think that's often self-defeating, because it just sucks you into the dance with the critic. It's a lot better, actually, to disidentify from the critic. It's over there. Observe it mindfully with some disidentification. Sometimes people will do little methods that are very effective, like give the critic a funny name that's a little disparaging, or see it a little bit as a goofy Disney villain in like a Disney comic book movie like Simon Legree or some little character, the Grinch. I've known people call it that, the Grump, over there. But mostly focus on repeatedly internalizing experiences that are counters to the critic, that balance it. Experiences of what I call your caring committee, where you feel that you are of worth, you are of value, both from the outside in. In other words, being aware of authentic, not million-dollar moments usually, but authentic experiences. And I'll name 5 opportunities here that get increasingly intense to feel included, seen, appreciated, liked, or loved, including in very mild ways over the course of a day. Everyone has opportunities to experience that kind of thing in the moment, or even if they're living in a cave in solitude, to bring up memories. Felt memories of that sort of thing. And as you have those experiences, which are different aspects of being cared about, all 5 aspects, slow down to receive those. Also, to build up these inner resources that are self-nurturing and protecting and encouraging and supportive. You can also be aware of your own goodness. Deep down inside, really, there is goodness there. In some people, we have to look way deep down inside, but I believe it's always there, present in everyone as part of our fundamental nature, maybe shading into something that's transcendental perhaps, but minimally inside the natural frame of ordinary reality. There's a fundamental goodness and purity and good intention and benevolence inside everybody. So you can be aware of that in yourself. You can also be aware through what's called self-affirmation theory of your own capabilities of various kinds. Like, this is good about me. I'm able to do this. I've learned to do that. Through repeatedly having those experiences and then internalizing them, you build up strong, self-nurturing, caring forces inside you, which then become bigger and bigger and bigger in comparison to the critic. And then over time, you start challenging the critic. You say, so tell me something I don't already know. Thank you for sharing. We got it. The critic is like that sort of annoying person in a committee who's always negative, and still there's a function that person serves. So you don't want to go to war with the critic, because then you're just feeding the critic. The weight, though, is to take charge of your own mind, drawing on these resources that are caring, like adding good people to your committee who are supportive and practical and realistic and not over the top, and prepared to see what's positive and what's good about yourself. And they're the ones who are murmuring, sweetie, it's okay. Keep going. Don't give up. You're okay. You're good. It's all right. This is not such a big deal. We can figure this out. Keep going. Those parts inside ourselves, we're adding them to our own internal committee through repeated neuroplastic change. So that over time, that critic is just one voice among a dozen, and their voice is increasingly, quieter and quieter, related to the other voices in your committee.
Thank you. And so we have more questions coming in around self-care, but first I'd love to dive into the pillar of mindfulness, and then we'll open back up for more questions after that. So if you could tell us a little bit about the pillar of mindfulness.
Right. So there's kind of a natural sequence, where life has happened and it's kind of shocking. And almost even before you can be mindful, you've got to sort of stabilize inside with a fundamental stance of loyalty in effect, or caring toward yourself. Now that stabilization of that stance might only take a few seconds, but it's sort of like you get on your own side, and then mindfulness starts coming in. What the heck is going on, right? What's happening outside me? What's happening inside me? What the heck is going on? And mindfulness is a word that has sort of elastic properties these days. It can get stretched to mean a lot of things, which is okay as long as we know what we're saying. I'll start with, for me, a very simple, fundamental definition of it that's rooted in the contemplative tradition I know best, basically early Buddhism. And this notion of mindfulness is very simple. It's not esoteric at all. It's sustained present moment awareness with typically a metacognitive quality of awareness that's recollected. You are recollected moment by moment by moment by moment. In that early Buddhist tradition, mindfulness is neutral and it's simple. Around it are other factors like training and steadiness of mind, concentration power. It's also helpful around the mindfulness to have an attitude of acceptance and even insight into what you're mindful of. But mindfulness itself is neutral and simple. It's absolutely foundational because mindfulness has to do with the regulation of attention. And lots of the time, we're not very mindful. We're lost in thought. We have a wandering mind. Research on people who are pinged randomly over the day shows that on average, their mind is wandering at least 50% of the time. And the more that the mind wanders, the more that it tends for those individuals to be ruminating about negative things with related mental health issues. A wandering mind, I think this is the title of one of these core papers, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind on the whole. There's a place for letting your mind wander to some extent, but particularly with modern culture that habituates us to needing stimulation all the time and thus chasing the next shiny object, and also with occupations that do much the same. In a way, we've trained ourselves to have a mind that wanders, and it's important to be able to have more regulation of it. That's also useful in terms of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, because what we pay attention to is the front end of who we are becoming. Neurons that fire together wire together, and this happens in particularly for what's in the field of focused attention, which of course makes sense in evolutionary terms. Our animal ancestors and human ancestors, non-human animal ancestors, and human animal ancestors needed to learn from what they paid attention to. All right. So if you can't get regulatory control over the front end of who you are becoming, if you can't control the vacuum cleaner that is endlessly sucking, things into you, you're not autonomous and you're not able to be self-reliant and effective for others, let alone yourself in this crazy world. Attention, in a way, is our most fundamental property. And mindfulness in this section of my 12 pillars model has to do with training in mindfulness, including steadiness. So there are a number of neural factors that I could get into that promote steadiness of mind that we can train in. And also, as we train in attention in this way, we start to compensate for the brain's evolved negativity bias, which wants to draw our attention to what's threatening and worrisome and painful and problematic for survival purposes and overlearn from it. This is one of the most robust findings in neuroscience, that we have this negativity bias. I say it gives us a brain that's like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones. And through learning how to regulate our attention mindfully, we can pay attention to what's problematic. I'm not talking here about positive thinking. I don't believe in positive thinking. I believe in realistic thinking, seeing reality squarely, including the many useful, enjoyable, and beneficial things about it, including inside yourself. And being able to get control over a brain that tends to zero in on that one tile in the mosaic of reality that's flashing red, particularly if people have had trauma experiences or even milder but still consequential painful experiences in their past or in their present, which tends to particularly turbocharge the negativity bias. So mindfulness is great. It's absolutely fundamental.
So we have a question here from Rebecca. As a junior doctor trying to bring more mindfulness and compassion into the workplace, do you have any tips, like short practices that can be easily incorporated in a busy day and shared with team members to foster a more positive and supportive work environment?
That's great. Okay, great. And also want to just say, really from my heart, I have so much gratitude for people who work in healthcare. Really, just thinking about my family members who've gone through things, my father, mother, their last days and months. Just much gratitude right off the top for people in healthcare and people training in healthcare. So thank you. It's a great question. So here I'll also say mindfulness in a kind of simple sense of recentering. Think of it like that, recentering. And so what are the kinds of things that are really useful to do that? Here are some hacks that have to do with how the brain works. And if someone's medically trained, they'll recognize some of what I'm talking about. One is for a single breath or even half of a breath, be aware of the interior sensations of breathing. That engages a part of the brain called the insula. We have two of them technically, but they're usually spoken of in the singular, two on either side, one on each side of the brain. So when you tune into the sensations of breathing internally, like the feeling of the air coming down through your throat and into your lungs, or the sense of the rib cage rising or falling, inhaling and exhaling, that engages the insula, which draws you into a sense of what it's like to be me in this moment in a strong way. Also, technically, as you repeatedly, fire and wire in terms of the insula, you develop greater capacities to be empathic toward yourself and toward other people. So that's a trick right there. If you just focus attention on the internal sensations of breathing for one or more breaths, that tends to really bring you in the moment for yourself. That's one. Another hack that goes to how the brain works is to be aware of your whole body at the same time. Imagine, if you like, all the skin of your body. I think Alan Watts called us a skin bag, with openings at either ends. We're like a bag of skin. Or you can just have a sense as you breathe of all the sensations in your body known at once. It might take a moment or two or a few cycles to practice this, but as you do this, technically, you start activating networks on the sides of your brain, especially in the right hemisphere for right-handed people and many left-handed people. And those networks are involved with a kind of gestalt awareness, a global awareness. And as they activate these lateral networks, that reduces activation in the midline, where we tend to get caught up in stressful task doing or negative ruminating. And as we activate these lateral networks, the sense of self gets quieter as well, and we become more dropped in. And ways to activate these lateral networks include pretty much anything that gives you a holistic sense, like the sense of your body breathing as a whole, or a panoramic perspective. If you lift your gaze out toward the horizon line, looking out a window, say, or even up to the sky, that too will have that kind of impact. If you're in a room, just taking a breath while you look up to the corner, let's say, or the ceiling, just try it. Within seconds, you will be more grounded in yourself. And then the last hack I'll just mention, and it's not that I'm like a hackster, but I just think it's great to have some capacity to work the machinery skillfully and plausibly from the inside out. The last one I'll suggest is several long exhalations. Long exhalations, as physicians know and others, engage the parasympathetic wing of the nervous system, which is the counter, as it were, to the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system that's very involved with fight and flight activity, as well as healthy passion. But a lot of running around and being in very stressful, busy environments really tends to engage the sympathetic branch of the nervous system. So it's important to calm it down often through energizing the parasympathetic wing through, for example, long exhalations. Just try it. 2 or more exhalations that are at least as long, if not longer than your inhalations, will immediately have a kind of calming and fortifying effect. So right off the top, those are things that you can do from the inside out. And more generally, I know a number of people in healthcare are really attending to this, including in terms of physician well-being um, and the well-being of others working in healthcare systems. And there's more attention to, from almost like a policy standpoint or a programmatic standpoint, building in more mindful moments throughout the day.
All right, so our next question is from Joan. Can you comment on the similarities and differences between being in the zone, like running, playing sports, etc., and being mindful?
This is a real interesting question. That's a very sophisticated question. Being in the zone are like flow states from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, that kind of territory. And people go back and forth about this. I suspect there's certain kinds of flow states where there's a loss of the metacognitive capacity. You're just so completely immersed that being aware that you're immersed mindfully would almost take you out of the experience on the one hand. On the other hand, there are other kinds of flow states that people talk about in which there is still some metacognitive capability. There's still some awareness of what's happening so that as they are painting or making love or making dinner or just playing with their children in flow, there's a real sense of ease while simultaneously being aware of what it's like to be in that sense of ease. So I think both of them are possible, and they're not at odds with each other. And very often, I think that these states of being that we initially might mark in ways that feel very distinct, like, wow, that's what it's like to be in flow while playing tennis. Or that's what it's like to be very mindful while doing meditation, say, for a minute or 10 minutes or 45 minutes. Oh, this is what mindfulness is like. With a lot of practice, these states that are initially differentiated become more integrated and they start flowing together seamlessly, which of course is very much how the brain and the nervous system operates. There is localization of function, and there's a place for being able to differentiate those different forms of function. But then in reality, increasingly, they start flowing together, like a symphony in a way. It's important to be able to differentiate this violin from that tuba. But once the music really plays, it all is woven together.
So the next question is sort of paraphrased from a few different people asking similar questions. When trauma comes up in meditation, what do you recommend doing? How can we take care of ourselves?
Well, right there in me is what I also encourage in people is just a surge of compassion. And compassion can seem like a fancy word. I mean, whatever it is for you, a tenderness, the feeling of it landing. Compassion has 3 fundamental elements. There's empathy, there's benevolence, and there is a movement to help if one can. And by the way, the compassion is real, even if there's nothing we can do. All right. So there, and what one can do in part has to do with the nature of the meditation and also one's overall purposes, right? So one option is if a person is doing a kind of meditation in which it's called focused attention practice, where their attention is really concentrated on a particular object, like the sensations of breathing in the body or at the upper lip, or on a word or an image. One option then is simply to be aware of the trauma feelings, much as if one would be aware of, a pain in your left knee or the sound of a car alarm going off nearby, and you just ignore it as best you can. You don't fight it, but you really focus on your object of attention. That would be one option. Or if one is doing more of an open awareness practice in which there's a minimum kind of stability of connection with some anchor that kind of grounds you, while simultaneously really just letting the whole stream of consciousness go by. Trauma material is just more flotsam and jetsam in the stream of consciousness. I'm not trying to minimize it or disparage it, but I just am kind of putting it that way, that we don't privilege it. It just rolls by. We don't follow it when we're doing an open awareness practice. We don't feed it. So one could practice in that way. Alternately, one could use meditation, as I have myself very often, as a very useful opportunity for some healing. Because if you're meditating, you already have a number of factors in play that are beneficial. There's a centeredness, there's a relative calm typically. You're sequestered, hopefully. Secluded was the word that shows up in a lot of the early Buddhist teachings, from things that are distracting or pressuring you in the moment. There's like, you have room to breathe. You are breathing during meditation. Well, if it's useful to you and you don't turn your meditation sessions into self-therapy entirely, well, for a few minutes, maybe it might be useful to explore this trauma material if you don't get hijacked by it. Very, very important. Do not underestimate the power of that material. Its gravitational force can really suck you right in. If you're sucked into it, you're reinforcing it, especially with the negativity bias. But if you can observe it, if you can be aware of the trauma material in a space of untroubled awareness, because of course awareness itself is never stained or damaged by what passes through it. If you can hold the trauma material in that field of untroubled observing, witnessing consciousness, you are then associating an untroubled field of awareness to the trouble moving through it. And through repetition, that association of neutral, untroubled sense of being, the association to the trauma material can gradually soothe and ease and calm and contextualize the trauma material. It's not that we forget what happened. It's not even that we're no longer triggered sometimes or we feel things strongly, but it gradually attenuates. It gradually can reduce. That's very powerful. Additionally, and I'll finish on this one, as one engages or witnesses the trauma material, it can be very helpful and a very powerful form of, in effect, self-therapy, which is done with professionals when you're in formal therapy, is to be aware of a matched resource or antidote to the trauma material and do what I call linking, which is the fourth optional step in my HEAL model of the fundamental neuropsychology of growth, of learning, in which we have, enrich, and absorb useful experiences. And then if we want, link those beneficial experiences to painful, harmful, quote unquote, negative material, like trauma material. So making it kind of summary, the trauma material, let's say, surfaces in a meditation. Maybe you begin by being with it, accepting it, seeing what's there. Maybe you also focus on letting it go, releasing, letting it flow, maybe in rhythm with, extra long exhalations, and maybe visualizing the trauma material flowing out of your body, easing out into the world. And then you let in. So let be, let go, let in. 3 great ways to practice. Then you let in an awareness of resources that are matched to the trauma, like the felt sense of beings who love you, or a felt sense of your own strength and intactness and still here-ness, very foregrounded in the field of awareness, the positive being big, with, let's say, the trauma material off to the side of the stage of attention, like a big stage. And when you're aware of both of these at the same time, keeping the positive, the resource experience bigger, it gradually will associate with the negative to contextualize it, ease it, soothe it, and maybe even eventually actually replace it. So that's a useful practice. And then maybe if someone wants to do that, they engage practice in this way, which is different from, a kind of classic mindfulness practice of open awareness. You do this with your trauma material for a few minutes, and then it seems like there's a natural rhythm where it feels complete, and then you return to your more formal meditative approach.
Okay, our next question here is from Kylie, who asks, if you were to suggest a key daily practice, what would it be?
What a great question. Um, I'm going to suggest three, and you can do only one. But if you want to do all three, I call this the 10-minute challenge. It takes less than 10 minutes a day, and it's really transformational. So, number one, key practice, take in the good on the fly a handful of times every day. Really make it your mission, and you could do a little thing like at the end of the day, you mark when you did it, or you know when you did it. Or you could create a little formal opportunity like at each meal or maybe just before bed or on first waking, where you turn to what's authentically beneficial, either usually because you're experiencing it already, or maybe you deliberately call it up. You deliberately call up some things you're grateful for, or you deliberately call up, just the feeling of good times with friends. And the important point is when you call up these experiences, focus on the experience itself, not the method that was used to activate the experience. That's just a means to an end. You want to focus on the experience, especially the more emotional and somatic aspects of the experience. So taking the good on the fly. That takes less than a couple minutes a day. Just literally a breath here, half a minute there, half a dozen times a day. I would highly recommend that practice. Second, know one thing in particular you're trying to grow these days. What's a key strength you're working on or a key release, right? Maybe it's quite subtle. Maybe you're really working on a greater stability of a real-time felt sense of everything being impermanent endlessly while simultaneously arising while you're connected with everything. That's pretty good. Maybe that's what you're working on. Or on the other hand, maybe you're just working on not getting caught up in arguments with other people, including in your own mind. You're disengaging from contentiousness, from quarrelsomeness. You don't take the bait even. That's what you're working on these days, building up the strength of not getting sucked into these wrangles with other people, saying what you need to say and then disengaging. Maybe that's the strength you're working on, whatever it might be. Notice what your strength is and look for opportunities to experience it. That's the first stage of change. Experiencing what we want to develop, and then value those experiences highly because they're a priority for you these days. So know the one thing in particular you're trying to grow these days. And then the third, if you're up for it, is spend at least a minute or more a day marinating in deep green. What I mean by that is not taking a bath in green paint. I mean resting in what I call the green zone, which is a very strong felt sense of needs met enough in the moment for safety, satisfaction, and connection, so that you're really rested in and abiding in a sense of peace, contentment, and love, rather than being agitated by a sense of something missing, something wrong, thus craving. Second noble truth leads to a lot of suffering for yourself and others. In other words, peace, contentment, love, rather than fear, frustration, and heartache. And that marinating in deep green is so important to retrain the visceral core of the body into, as I said, this unshakable, resilient well-being, especially in a life and in a world that drags us into the red zone routinely, maybe mildly or moderately, but chronically, in which we're continually stressed, or we get messages that there's something missing, something wrong that we need to fix by buying this or doing that. Marinating in deep green. So those are three things you could do. If you did all three of them every day, it'd be less than 10 minutes. And tell me, who among us would not have their day substantially changed for the better if they invested 10 minutes a day in doing all three of those?
Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
I see we're getting close to the end of our time. So
Oh no.
I know there's so many questions.
Gotta let go.
I did let folks know that we'd have a chance to hear a little bit about your online course that really dives into each of these 12 pillars of well-being, the foundations of well-being. And so if you could just tell us a little bit about that approach in this course and why you chose to create it.
Oh, thank you. Well, as you could probably tell, and I can feel it already, I just have a passion for growing, like the how of growing, right? And then the application of the how, the neuropsychological how, in practical ways of growing to growing resources inside to help our lives be better, including in a world that has many, many good things happening in it. While simultaneously, for many people, there's a very strong sense that institutions and communities and even politics and cultures that used to be reliable and dependable and supportive are kind of falling away. And to use a maybe troubled metaphor, the cavalry is not coming. You know, it's important to do what we can in the world outside, but meanwhile, it's really important to develop ourselves. So what's nice about doing things online, and that's the online program, is you can offer to anybody in the world who has access to the internet, which is pretty much almost everybody these days. Um, and through an online program, you can also systematically pull together tons of great resources and then offer them to people and enable them to engage it at their own pace anytime they want in any kind of way. So what I did is I pulled together this online program that is highly reviewed. It's really cool, actually. We go into depth in each one of the 12 pillars, each one of which is broken into 4 sections. Well, if you think about it, that gives you, if you want, a year-long journey of personal transformation that we've structured to take about an hour a week. And each one of these units inside each one of these pillars involves a talk from me, a guided experiential meditation, getting those neurons firing together so they wire together, as well as interviews with guest experts, really top people like Barbara Fredrickson on positive emotions, Sue Carter on connection, Jack Kornfield on mindfulness, Tara Brach on self-caring. Like, it's great. It's like the total A team, as well as a number of other bonus experts. And then we have little quizzes so you can assess yourself and see your progress. And there are also opportunities to connect with other people. So that's the Foundations of Wellbeing program. People can find out more about it. We've got about 15,000 people in it already. We're happy to give scholarships for people in financial need. Otherwise, it's very well priced for everything that's in it. And it just delights me endlessly that in a really kind of comprehensive way, right? And people can pick and choose what they want to get into or not. There's no shortage of resources in this program. If anything, there's more than enough. It just makes me so happy that people on their own really can help themselves in a systematic and thorough-going way, in ways that are grounded in science, in good science, really develop strengths inside to help themselves and also help other people.
Thank you, Rick. And so I spoke to Rick's team before this call, and him and his team have decided to also offer a special coupon code, giving a $50 discount to the course to the community that's watching, whether you're watching now or the recorded session later. So make sure to enter that in. It's awake in all capitals 50, the number 50, and that'll give you an additional $50 off the course if you plan to participate. And then also, I would just like to say that, I've seen a lot of online programming out there, and I've had a good look at Rick's course over time and participated in parts of it as well. And we just really believe in Rick's work and this course. And so we're also offering a bonus from the Awake Network. And basically have your choice of choosing 2 gifts that are going to come with the registration when you register for this course. If you register by this Tuesday, June 18th, then we're going to be including one of these 2 gifts, and you basically get to choose between the Mindful Living Week resource package, which is one of our recent summits that has over 25 dialogues, presentations, and guided meditations from renowned psychologists, mindfulness teachers, and thought leaders, going through each area of your life and looking at how to integrate mindfulness into that area. And then the second choice is more for the medical professionals out there. Many of you probably saw our recent summit on mindful healthcare. And we're also offering the option of 1 free login to the Mindful Healthcare Summit, including all 20 dialogues, presentations with leading researchers, mindfulness experts, practicing physicians, and others as a resource as well. So you can check out more about that and Rick's course by clicking the link below this video. That'll bring you to a page that tells you all the details. And again, we're going to be having that special, both the coupon and the free gifts, up until this Tuesday. So I hope that if you're interested, you do participate. And as Rick mentioned, they have a very robust scholarship program as well. So if this is something that you want to do, take the leap.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I see that we have come to the end of the hour. Thank you so much, Rick, and thank you for everyone that's watching out there.
Same from my heart. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next time.